Mary Douglass. I hope that you are doing well. God bless you. Hope that all is well with you. And we're going to spend some time here and talk a little bit about Anna Murray Douglass. We're going to talk about Frederick Douglass's first wife. So I hope that you are doing well. And I kind of wanted to jump into this conversation to give her due. There's so many people in history. There's so many people that are so remarkable. When we know that the hands that built America, the hands that built the world, the hands that built our lives, that propped us up into where we are today, were hands that a lot of people don't know about. You know, a lot of people will know obviously about Frederick Douglass and some of the many things he's done with his life, some of the amazing things he's done, but a lot of people don't know about Anna Murray and who she is in her own right, right? And so when I think about this and I think about Anna Murray's life, I think about her from the perspective of somebody who's doing the work, somebody who's laying the groundwork. There are many millions of people who are fighting against slavery, who are fighting to prop up future generations whose names we'll never know, right? Who did things that we don't remember, that we don't talk about. But sometimes if we dig deep enough, we can find them, and we can find things they did. So she represents that to me. She represents the people who are helping to build a better future for you and I, to make sure we're not living in the kind of world that they had to live in. And she didn't get a whole lot of glory for it. She didn't get a whole lot of accolades, but God blessed her with a lot of things and a lot of strength. And we're gonna talk about today. And I just want to say first, thank you for those who are joining us online. I very much thank you. Thank you for those in the super chat who put down some super thanks and just your comments, right? I know there are a lot of comments about Frederick Douglass' wife. I know a lot of people have questions about that. I want to thank you for your comments. I want to thank you for those who are members and who've joined for just $4.99 a month or $9.99 a month. I'm going to be putting the resource we're going to talk about today on the site that you can have access to it. But I want to jump into this, and I just thank you for all the support. I want to jump at this and talk about Anna Murray Douglass, right? She to me was a remarkable woman, and she is somebody who's fun to talk about. When you think about people's lives and people who had an impact, she really rings out to me. And a lot of what we're going to say and talk about will be from a speech and a piece that her daughter did. Frederick Douglass and Anna Murray, their oldest child was Rosetta Douglass. And she wrote a speech, if you will, and a piece, if you will, that is my mother, it said my mother as I recall her. So it's an amazing piece that gives you some perspective. And a lot of people will talk a lot about Frederick Douglass's first wife, but really have never read some things about her. So we're going to dig into that piece and dig into some things in general about Anna Murray's life. And, we think about it. One of the things that we think about, and Rosetta talks about this, the daughter talks about this in her speech that she gave about her mom. But, when you start out in life, a lot of times you don't know what life holds for you, right? You may start out and you may meet somebody, or you're just maybe, going on a bit of an adventure or exploring things yourself, and you don't know what life holds for you. It's kind of like, as Rosetta mentioned, it's kind of like looking at a mountain and knowing that you want to go up that mountain, and you don't know what it's going to entail. You don't even know what's at the top of the mountain. You don't know what it's going to be like, but you want to climb. And that's kind of what life is like. And when you think about, Anna, and when she met Frederick Douglass and the things she decided to do with her life, she didn't know where it was going to take her. And Frederick Douglass didn't know where it was going to take him, but they went anyway. And in the speech that their child gave, that Rosetta gave, she talks about, and I'll kind of read it here just because I think it's important. Real life is a struggle. It's an activity, a will to execute. When you think about that whole idea of will, we've talked a lot about Heru and the concept of Heru from Kemetic theology, and a lot of the rulers in ancient Kemet and the queens were called Heru. They were examples of that, and I liken that to courage, and I liken that to will, right? So here is Rosetta talking about her mom and talking about her dad and saying, real life is a struggle, an activity, a will to execute, a desire precedes effort. Your life with no desire, no effort is merely an existence, and is void of the elements that make life worth living. Think about that for a second. She is saying, life in general, if you don't have desire, if you're not really executing, willing to do something, you're really not living. You're really not pushing forward. And just to give you some perspective in terms of what she looked like, just so you can have some perspective, this is a picture of Rosetta Douglass. This is the woman who wrote this piece about her mother, really dedicating to her mother, because she saw, just like many of us did and do, that a lot of what happened with Frederick Douglass and a lot of the amazing things he did with his life, he did that because he had a family of support, and Anna Murray Douglass was with him from the very beginning of his trek out of slavery for the next 44 years. So we're going to talk about that. And Rosetta decided to let some people know about her mother, right? She decided to let them know like what's happening with her mom and just some things were going on. So as we dig into that whole idea that life is a struggle and that desire precedes effort, that really connects to some of the Kemetic things we talked about. Because from a Heru standpoint, that ability to make a choice. In her life, Anna Murray had several choices. So did Frederick Douglass. So do we all, right? She had many choices that she had to make, and she made a lot of the right choices, right? But when you're making a choice, there's a certain type of courage there. There's a certain type of will. You have to decide, right, if you're going to do it or not. And sometimes you got to drum up that will to do it. And when you think about that whole idea of desire or wanting something or being attached to something, we've talked about the Shabaka stone and the Memphite theology and what King Shabaka, the Kushite king, said in terms of everything what you see and what you hear and what you breathe upon feed into your heart, and they make all beliefs come forth, right? When you meditate on something, when you take something into your heart, you're really creating your own beliefs. You are creating the things that will move you forward. And so when we think about desire and we think about moving forward, that speaks to Anna Murray's life, from a Haru standpoint and a Kemetic standpoint. We can see and analyze, and that's what I love about thinking about Kemetic theology and Kushite theology. You can apply it in so many different ways. And when you think about, Metanetter and things like that, you can apply it in so many different ways. So let's talk about Anna Murray and just kind of get into her life. As we look at her, she was born in 1813. So she wasn't someone who was, born into very high stakes. She wasn't someone who was obviously born in any riches. It's interesting because as Rosetta, as their daughter, Frederick and Anna's daughter, describe them, she mentions right here, which I think is important. I'd love to hear your thoughts on. She mentions 2 lives, talking about her father and mother, gave me a home where wisdom and industry went hand in hand, where instruction and was given, that a cultivated brain and an industrious hand were the twin conditions that led to a well-balanced life. She talked about, what her father brought to the table and what her mother brought to the table. And they worked as a team. And I can imagine that was a household that you didn't talk back in. They probably weren't smart to their mom. They probably weren't talking back to their dad. I don't think they probably took that. It sounds as if Anna Murray ran a tight ship, that she ran a tight home, and that her children were not children. God bless you. God bless you so much. I very much appreciate it. So I hope that you are doing well. Thank you. So hope that you are doing well. God bless you. And so when you think about it, a lot of people, it looks like Anna Murray ran a tight home, that she was not somebody who was taken lightly. I don't think she took a lot of smack or talk back from her children. And she was someone who distinguished herself by how she ran her home. Think about this for a second. There weren't a whole lot of resources and opportunities available for Anna Murray. She might have been a financial advisor. She could have been an organizer, a manager of many different things, but it wasn't a whole lot offered to her in the 1800s, right? She was living in Maryland. She was born in Maryland, in Denton, in Caroline County, Maryland, and she was born around 1813, we believe, around 1813. Interesting enough, her parents had several children, and in the children that her parents had, they had several children, and they had 12 children actually. And the children that they had, the last 5 of them were born outside of slavery. So essentially, Anna Murray missed being born in slavery by like 2 months, right? Which is an amazing thing, because a lot of times we think about people who were amazing people in history, and we don't think about how their life was like. What was life for their siblings? Like, what was life like for them? Because even Ida B. Wells was born in 1862. She was born in slavery. Her parents were enslaved until the end of the Civil War. A lot of people that we think of, and I never think about Ida B. Wells and slavery, but her parents were enslaved, and she was born in 1860. She was born during slavery. She was born enslaved. And even children who were infants obviously had, and small children obviously had their lives affected by being born into slavery and their parents into slavery. And Frederick Douglass, attests to that. So when you think about this, Anna Murray, she's born in Caroline County. She's on the eastern shore of Maryland. She's actually born not too far from where Frederick Douglass was born. She's born on the eastern shore of the Chesapeake Bay, and she's not born very far from where Frederick Douglass was born or where Harriet Tubman was born. So it's very interesting that they were born not too far from each other. She was actually a little bit older than Frederick Douglass. She was born in 1813. He was probably born in 1817. And I know some people will say, if somebody wants to stop me and say that Frederick Douglass was born in 1818, just the analysis that I've done, everything that I've seen, and he himself questioned when he was born. I think he was born in 1817. I got to look at some cemetery plots of some of the people who were mentioned in his autobiography, and you can see when they were born, when they died, and the numbers don't add up to him necessarily being born in 1818, in my opinion. So I think he was born in 1817, but regardless of that, she was a little bit older than him. She was born in 1813. And she was born, as I mentioned, in Caroline County, Maryland, not that far from when Frederick Douglass was born and not that far from where Harriet Tubman was born. And she was somebody, so she was born and she missed, as I mentioned, being enslaved by about 2 months. Many of her siblings were enslaved. Her parents were enslaved, but they ended up being freed and freeing themselves. And she ended up being born right after they were free, which was fortunate for her. And she ends up, when she's a young lady, maybe around 17 years old, going to Baltimore. And when she goes to Baltimore, she gets a job as a housekeeper, as someone who is managing people's homes and cleaning people's homes and really managing the home. And one of the things apparently that she does when she goes there, she develops a reputation. She develops a reputation as someone who's very thorough. That when she manages a house, that house is managed. She ends up being somebody who's kind of in demand and well respected by the people who were her employers, because she was free and she was being paid. And she ends up being someone who's very industrious. She saves her money. She does smart things with money. A lot of people at that time didn't even own beds, and she ended up owning 2 feather beds. She did things with her money that were investments for what she could do. And as I mentioned, she was smart and she was thorough in what she did. So her life, was already kind of set in terms of the character that she would have, right? And the things that she would do. And her things would change for her. She would start to get a little bit of a different change in life when she met Frederick Douglass. And if you know Frederick Douglass's story from the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, you know that he was born, as I mentioned, on the eastern shore of the Chesapeake Bay, that he was enslaved there for the first several years of his life. When he was maybe 8 or 9 or 7 or somewhere thereabouts, he was loaned out as a gift. Imagine a child being given as a gift. He was being owned by a man that they called, the captain, if you will. Captain Anthony, who was probably his father and who probably raped and attacked his mother as well as his aunts. Captain Anthony ended up allowing his daughter, who was Lucretia, probably Frederick Douglass's half-sister, to loan Frederick Douglass out as a gift to her husband's brother-in-law. So Thomas Auld was Lucretia's husband, and he loans and gives Frederick Douglass as a gift. And Frederick Douglass goes as a child of maybe 8 or 9 years old or thereabouts, or a little younger, and he goes to Baltimore to live with the Auld family, Hugh Auld, and to be a gift to their son, who was about the same age, which is kind of ridiculous. And he goes back and forth between Baltimore and the Eastern Shore a couple times and several things, and tries to make an attempt to leave slavery, and he ends up, being taken to a breaker, if you will, someone who was meant to break him. He ends up fighting back the man. A lot happens on the Eastern Shore. And then when he tries to escape from the Eastern Shore and is almost caught, but they don't exactly find the evidence, by some kind of work of God, instead of being sold into Georgia, Frederick Douglass goes back to Baltimore. And when he goes back to Baltimore, eventually that's where he meets her. And he meets her, and apparently they immediately fall in love. Apparently there's an attraction there from the very beginning. Frederick Douglass, he has experiences when he is in Baltimore where he is working on ships. And then when he's working on ships, he's doing all kinds of caulking and all kinds of hard work, literally, helping to build ships, people build them by hand, obviously. And he's taking that money back to Hugh Auld, who was his owner's, brother-in-law, because the other guy died, his father died, who was likely his father. He ends up taking the money back to him, and he's ticked off. He's ticked, right? Here he is working hard all day, and his hands are hurting and bleeding, and he has to bring money home. He's, by this time he's a young man, and he's like, I got to bring money home and that I'm working for and just give to this dude because I'm enslaved. That's crazy to me, right? And he ends up, as I mentioned, mentioning her, and I believe he met her with respect to some of the religious organizations that he was hanging out with. There were obviously religious organizations and African-American religious centers. And a lot of people in Baltimore, a lot of times an enslaved person really wasn't allowed to interact with free black people for obvious reasons, right? They wouldn't want that free black person to influence the enslaved person to become free or things of that nature. But Frederick Douglass went amongst free black people and befriended them, and they befriended him. So both people were taking a chance. When she kind of took him in as a friend, as well as the other people that was in his circle, that were in his circles, they were taking a chance. Not only could they be reprimanded or something could happen to him, but something can also happen to Frederick Douglass befriending free black people. And one day Frederick Douglass went away for a weekend, and he was probably spending time with her, but he went away to a religious function, if you will. And he didn't bring his money back to Hugh Auld when he was supposed to before he went away on this weekend trip that Hugh Auld knew he was going on. And when Hugh Auld came back, he was furious, and they almost got the blows. And Frederick Douglass said, I had promised myself when I was back on the Eastern Shore, I was never going to let anybody hit me again. If he had hit me, we were going to be fighting. And they ended up not fighting. And at that time, when they got in such an argument, when the man argued with Frederick Douglass about not bringing home his money, Douglass decided to leave. He said, you know what? I'm leaving. I've been thinking about escaping. I've been thinking about leaving. I'm leaving. And when he made that decision that he was going to escape, Anna Murray was probably the most important person in helping him escape. There were a lot of people who helped him. There were several people who helped him, but Anna Murray's importance and the significance that she did was the reason he was able to do it. And when you start to think about it, God bless you. She did so many things to help him. So I'm sharing this right here. This is an example of a man who was a Civil War sailor, right? And, this is obviously prior to the Civil War when Frederick Douglass is escaping. It's 1838. He's going to escape in September of 1838. And what happened was the plan was worked out that he was going to dress up as a sailor. And they met an African-American man who was a sailor who had papers that allowed him to travel freely because he was a seaman. And the man, at great risk to himself, gave Frederick Douglass was to give him the papers and said, you can carry these papers. Frederick Douglass looked nothing like the man. The description looked nothing like them, but they devised a plan. And as they devised this plan, who was going to help him work this out, right? The plan was for him to dress like a sailor, right? And what you end up having is that Anna Murray ends up taking her money that she got as a housekeeper. She ends up buying the resources to sew his suit, buying the resources for his suit and the cloth for his suit. She ends up sewing together his suit. She ends up selling one of the two feather bids that she owned in order to help him have money to go on this trip, because the idea was that he was going to go down to the train station in Baltimore and he was going to try to make a bet that the conductor was not really going to look at his papers very intently, because when you're boarding a train right away, things are so busy and everybody's trying to sit down and, it can be commotion, that maybe the guy wasn't going to look at his papers right away. And that's exactly what happened. Frederick Douglass got there just before the train was about to go off. He was dressed in a suit that Anna Murray helped to buy and helped to sew for him and put together for him. And then he bought the ticket right there. He doesn't really say who met him at the station, but he buys the ticket right before getting on the train. He gets on the train and the conductor's looking at it, and the conductor starts to read his paper, and then something happens on the train that he has to go take a look at and pay attention to, and Frederick Douglass is on the train. But get this now, he's taking the train from Baltimore and he goes to Delaware. That's a ticket that has to be paid for, right? And remember, he's giving his money to who's helping him pay for the ticket? Who's sewing his clothes? Who put the clothes together and got the cloth for it? She was one of the underwriters, if you will, for his freedom trip. So he has to have a ticket to go from Baltimore to Delaware. Then he catches a ferry from Delaware to Philadelphia. He has to catch a boat there, like a steamboat. And then he catches another train from Philadelphia to New York. So there's at least 3 tickets he needs to purchase in order to do this. And she is bankrolled. She is putting forth her hard-earned money. She is putting forth her hard-earned money to help him dress like a sailor, to make sure he has the tickets to get on the boat and to get on the 2 trains and to make it all the way to New York. She is basically using her hard-earned money for this man that she loves, right? From the very beginning. And at the end of the speech, Rosetta Douglass, their first child, says, if there was no Anna Murray, there would have been no Frederick Douglass. From the very beginning of his career and his decision to leave slavery, Anna Murray was there. She was there right side by side with him, making him look like a sailor, selling her feather bed, taking her savings, helping him get his ticket, making sure everything he needed was in place so he can get to New York when he was in a situation where he had to give most of his money away. Right? So he had to have some pretty confidence that he was going to be able to get out if he was giving most of his money away. And he decided after that argument with Hugh Auld that he was going to leave in 3 weeks. So he needed somebody to help him, and Anna Murray was a help. So that whole idea of being able to say, I'm going to leave, but you know what? I got somebody who's going to help me. It wasn't just Frederick Douglass leaving. It was Frederick Douglass leaving, and there was somebody who was going to help him. He thought, he could say, it's amazing when you start somebody. Let's say you're somebody and you're going out, you want to go to college. You want to, get out and, start your future. You want to go to college. It's one thing to say, I want to go. It's another thing to say, I want to go to college and somebody's going to help me go. Somebody's going to help me pay for it. Somebody's going to help me get there. Somebody's going to be my support when I get there. I'm going to be able to call them and rely on them when I get there. Imagine that being the case with Frederick Douglass. I want to leave this hell of slavery, this hellhole, and I want to be able to go. And I got somebody. I want to leave the horrors of slavery, and I got somebody who's going to help me. And that was Anna Murray Douglass. And Frederick Douglass made this entire trip from to Delaware to Philadelphia to finally to New York in about 24 hours. He made that trip. And once he got there, he immediately wrote Anna and let her know that he got there safely. And Anna was free, as we mentioned. She was born free. So she immediately, once she got the news that he got there safely, she immediately packed up her stuff. She had a plum wedding dress that she was about to get married in. She took the other feather bed that she owned, because that was a priceless gift. That was a priceless thing there, to be able to have a bed, because they were starting life out together. She had various things that you would need to start a home, because she was an organizer, right? Because she was an organizer. And she got to New York, and they got married right away. And if you are familiar with James W.C. Pennington, he is one of the first, if not the first, African-American to basically go to Yale and graduate from Yale, even though there was challenges about whether or not that was a graduation. James W.C. Pennington wrote The Fugitive Blacksmith. He was also from Maryland. So he was a rather famous person on the Underground Railroad at the time. He married Anna Mary Douglass and Frederick Douglass. He married them. He performed the ceremony when they got to New York. So they got to New York. Obviously, his name was not Frederick Douglass. His name was Frederick Bailey. And he had people like David Ruggles and some people who were significant on the Underground Railroad. He had no idea. She had no idea what they were about to get into, right? The people that were helping them just like they helped anybody who was coming and escaping slavery and trying to start a new life. She was risking herself by helping Frederick Douglass and giving him her savings, right? Because he could have just left and not paid any attention to her. He didn't have to write her back, but she was giving her savings to help him get out. But, obviously he called and they got married. And he ends up changing his name, getting his name changed to Frederick Douglass, and they end up going to New Bedford. And they start a family together. They start a life together. And it's a hard life. As they go to New Bedford and they're working, it's not an easy life. It's a hard life that they're working on. He doesn't have, obviously, he's an escaped person, escaped from the horrors of slavery. He's an escaped man. She's a free woman who just helped somebody escape. And she has a lot of skills, right? But she still is in a new place. And she has to, find places to help people wash and to do whatever she can to help them, start a family. He has to go out and start doing all kinds of things he can do in New Bedford to start a family and to start to make money. And now you have a challenge, right? And so here you have this woman, and she is, God bless you, thanks so much. The book about Anna Mary Douglass. So you have to, I'd love you to read that. Thank you so much, Veronica. Thank you for sharing that. Please put some things down in the chat if you have more. And so one of the things thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. One of the things that's so interesting is that they're out there. And as you know the story, you probably know the story that Frederick Douglass begins to obviously start to meet some more African Americans. The whole idea of anti-slavery, he hated slavery, right? It was something in his chest that just hated slavery. And I think he knew, and he mentions knowing that there was a calling on his life. And as he begins to interact with circles in Massachusetts and begins to meet more people, Black people, as well as other people like William Lloyd Garrison and people like that, he starts to get, eventually onto the speaking circuit. But he, not like some of the other speakers, he's actually, an escaped person. And so you start to find things start to blow up for them, right? He begins to speak, and he's a powerful speaker. If you've read any of his speeches, like, July 5th and his speech on the 4th of July that he gave, you would start to, and you understand that he was a remarkable speaker. And if you're reading his books, you understand he had a way with words that were remarkable, that he basically helped to teach himself out of his own desire, right? As his daughter was saying, when you have a desire, you will move and move forward. He begins to blow up on the oratorical circuit, if you will. And a lot of people, and here she is behind the scenes, right? They start to have children. Here she is behind the scenes holding the fort down. And imagine what it's like for a woman. See, I kind of look at Frederick Douglass kind of like a Martin Luther King. He begins to have leadership thrust on him in a way that he was not expecting. And there is no blueprint, right? There's no Marcus Garvey to look at. There's no Booker T. Washington, even though you have thoughts about Booker T. Washington. There's no Malcolm X. There's no Martin Luther King. There's no leader in the same way that people now can look back. We have history to look back on and say, how did Dr. King handle this? How did Fannie Lou Hamer handle this? How did Harriet Tubman handle this? He didn't have a whole lot to look at. He was basically having national leadership thrust on him and the burden of a people. But he takes it, but he's not taking it alone. She is supporting him every step of the way. So one of the reasons that Frederick Douglass wrote the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, he wrote that because he got criticism as he was on the speaking circuit, as many people thought he was too intelligent. This is really just silly, just simple. Thought he was too intelligent to have ever been enslaved. And so part of the reason why he wrote Narrative of Life of Frederick Douglass in 1845, right? About 7 years after he escaped and after they got married, because they got married in 1838 as soon as he escaped. And they would be married for 44 years, by the way, just to let you know. He writes this book, basically partly to prove these people wrong. This whole idea that he maybe was never enslaved because he was so well spoken is just, this is how racist people were. Even people in the North, obviously, who might have been against slavery, who would think that a human being is not capable. That's why when we look at history, we have to ignore all these racist interpretations of history. People are people, and people have amazing abilities. And we have to know that when given a chance, even when you don't give them a chance at times, they are able to push through and do amazing things, incredible, intelligent things. So he writes the Narrative of Life of Frederick Douglass in 1845. And he names, for one of the first times in a lot of these narratives, these autobiographical narratives that talked about the horrors of slavery, he named real people. He talked about real people that they met. He did not talk specifically about how he escaped because he didn't want to rat out people, because his wife was one of the people who helped him, right? So he couldn't tell all the specifics of that. But he named the actual people who owned him, the actual people who beat him, the actual people who were enslaving him in Baltimore, the actual places. He named everything. He named all these things, and you could check it. And now there was heat. Now there was challenge going around. Now there was going to be a bit of a problem because he named real people, right? He ends up naming real people, and that puts his life in danger. Just like many people, and this is even before the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, but the idea of catching people was already still in place. He puts himself in danger. He puts his family in danger. But it was a remarkable book that kind of had to go out, that ends up sending shockwaves through the world, really, as people read about it. And you could go see who Thomas Auld was. You can go see where Lucretia, actually where she was buried. You can see where she's buried today. I've seen her grave. You can see where she's buried today. You can go see where Rowena was, the lady who married Thomas Auld. You can go find these people and find that they actually existed. So Frederick Douglass was in danger. And a lot of people encouraged him and told him, look, you got to leave because they're going to get you. You're basically out in front, you're on the oratorical circuit, you're speaking, you just told everybody exactly where you came from. So now they know where to get you. They're coming after you. You're going to have to leave. And so he did not want to leave, but he ended up having to leave. He ended up, and it was something where the anti-slavery community was telling him and Anna, look, we got you. We're going to help you, but we think he's going to need to go because somebody's going to get him. And so he ends up leaving, and it's kind of reluctantly. And Anna begins to talk about this, and Rosetta talks about this, the challenge that it was, because at the time that he's leaving, they're having children. And Rosetta, as I mentioned, is the one who's talking about the speech that we're talking about. Rosetta Douglass Spragg, she ended up getting married later on in life. She was their oldest daughter. So just to kind of walk you through who their children were, so you can know the children of Frederick Douglass and Anna Murray, just to walk you through their children. So we have Rosetta Spragg here, and she's the firstborn. And then we kind of go on. We have Lewis Henry Douglass, and he is someone also who serves in the Civil War. So you have at least a couple of Frederick Douglass's sons and Anna's sons serve in the Civil War and are remarkable there. So we have Lewis Henry Douglass. We end up also having Frederick Douglass Jr., and we have Charles Raymond Douglass. So she ends up having, 4 children, and they end up, after he gets back from Europe, having a 5th child, Annie Douglass. But Annie Douglass dies at a young age. She's born in 1849, and she dies in 1860. But prior to him leaving and going to Europe, because as I mentioned, he wrote the Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass in 1845, you can see that they already have Charles is born in 1844. They already have Frederick Douglass Jr. in 1842. They have Lewis Henry Douglass in 1840, and they have Rosetta Spragg in 1839. Just as soon as they get married, really, they're having children one after the other. So Anna Murray, when Frederick Douglass has to go to Europe to get away from the trouble that's probably coming to him, she's there. She's left there in the States and in Massachusetts, and she left in that area, and she is raising the 4 kids on her own. So here you have a woman, right, who's holding the fort down while her man is able to go out and kind of be the front face, if you will, and speaking against the evils of slavery. She's right there keeping the home together, keeping the children, making sure that they're well educated, making sure they're well fed. And Rosetta ends up going with one of the friends of the family, who were anti-slavery activists to kind of give some help on Anna because she had, young children, but she still has the three boys that are there that are very young that she's taking care of. And she ends up volunteering for anti-slavery activities. Here she is by herself, taking care of the home, taking care of the three young children, the three young boys, while Rosetta is out and while Frederick Douglass is in Europe trying to get away from the horrors that are probably going to come to him. And she's holding the fort down. She is volunteering for anti-slavery activities. She's helping to organize. When they would do these anti-slavery activities, a lot of times the women would come around and they would make like baskets, or they would make gifts or things that would be needed for either to give out to people or to organize it or to make the food or to make the whole gathering work in terms of resources that needed to be given out, food that needed to be done, things that needed to be taken care of. And sometimes there were packets that were given out or things that needed to be made by hand. They did these things. So Anna Murray would work in her days in the evening times as whatever she could, volunteering so that anti-slavery meetings could continue to happen, so that these things, the fight against slavery, were still taking place. And there was a lot of work, whether it was cooking the food or doing various things that needed to be done that nobody talked about, right? And she is able to kind of get that and make that happen. And then she is also at home making by hand shoe lasting. So at the time when you had shoes, when you had shoes, you had a leather mold. Leather was going over like a foot mold. They'd have a mold of your foot, and you had to stretch the leather over the mold to tie it to the soles in order to sew and to make shoes. And this apparently was difficult work. It took a while to do, and Anna Murray did it, and she did it in her home to be able to make ends meet, right? She did whatever she could. And so this was apparently not easy work, hard work. And Jan Ernst Massler, who was a black inventor, later on, years later, decades later, would develop a shoe lasting machine. They helped push this whole process forward. It's kind of interesting, but she was doing it by hand years and years earlier. She would actually do so much work that she would save up and do several shoes just so she would be able to donate to the Anti-Slavery Society so that they would have money to keep having these meetings to fight against slavery. She was doing all that while Frederick Douglass was in Europe. And when he came back, when he finally got his freedom, and it was a whole big negotiation, when he came back in around 1847, he came back to Anna. And the story goes, he comes to her and they're at home, and, he's expecting, he sent money, whatever he could, back from Europe to her. But he's expecting, we're going to be in financial trouble. I mean, I know you have to have incurred debt. I know this wasn't easy. You had the children to take care of, you were doing the best you can. And I know I sent you, but, I'm sure we have bills to pay. Let me know so we can take care of them. Anna Murray gets up. She's silent. She does not say a word to him. She just stands up. She walks over to the drawer and she pulls out the bank statements. She picks up the bank statements and she puts it in front of them. She says, "See everything that you sent me. See everything that I put in. We have absolutely no debts. I took care of everything." Anna Murray managed the money so that while she was working with her hands and building and making shoes and taking care of the children and volunteering for Anti-Slavery Society work, that they had zero debt, that she owed no one anything. Imagine the sacrifices and what that took from Andrew. And a lot of people say that in many ways, she actually managed money better than Frederick Douglass. She was actually a better money manager than Douglass was when he ran his businesses, that she was actually better at it. So he was amazed. He was shocked. He was like, wow, I was sure you would have incurred debt. I was sure we would be in some financial trouble. She was like, "No, we have no financial trouble. We owe no one anything. We owe nothing to anybody. And I took care of everything. You can see every cent that you sent, every cent that I made, and every cent that was taken out. Here's exactly where our finances are." And that was the kind of woman Anna Murray was. That was the kind of person she was. That was the kind of attention to detail that she had. And so she was a remarkable woman. And then the other thing that's important to say about her, when they end up moving to Rochester, New York, as you probably know, they are a stop on the Underground Railroad. They turned their house into a place where people can come, because Rochester is right by Canada, right? And, that's one of the last stops before you get over into Canada and kind of get past Niagara Falls and get on the other side. That's one of the last stops. Frederick Douglass had the home kind of enlarged, and Anna work the home so that they could receive people any time of the day or night, anytime somebody needed to come. They had their house set up, and Anna was a big part of it as a stop on the Underground Railroad. And one of the times, at least one of the times, but actually probably more than just once, Harriet Tubman came to their home. So Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman did not meet while they were enslaved. They were both enslaved in Maryland. They were born about 30, 40 miles away from each other, but they never met while they were enslaving. They met apparently on the Underground Railroad when Harriet Tubman was taking people from Maryland in slavery up through Philadelphia, through New York, and going all the way to Rochester. Frederick Douglass's home was one of the last stops she made before she got over into Canada. Imagine that for a second. And Anna Murray would get up any time of the day or night, any time of the night. She would have food for these people. She would have clothes for them. She would make sure that she was taking care of them because she understood. And remember, she was never enslaved herself, but her family was. Her mother and father were. Her siblings were. Her husband was. She was making sure her children were. She was willing. When we talk about Underground Railroad, there's a lot of people who talk, and then there are a lot of people who do. Anna Murray was a doer. Frederick Douglass was a doer. They didn't just talk about it. She didn't just, get out there and be in front of people. She was doing it. She was opening up her home. She was giving people food. She was making sure they had provisions. She was making sure they had clothes, that they had what they needed. And that was something that a woman or a person who's managing a household could do. Because imagine when you are traveling and you have been traveling for miles, you've been traveling all the way from Maryland, hundreds, some 500 miles away probably, and you're coming, you need the kind of comfort that a woman can offer you, or that a person who knows how to manage a home can offer you. You needed kind of things where maybe you need shoes because she knew how to do shoes, right? Maybe you need shoes for your feet. Maybe you needed a warm, coat. Maybe you needed food that would carry you over. You needed the kind of things that a mother, that a woman, that a wife, that somebody who was a professional manager of a home could do. And that's what Anna Murray was able to do on the Underground Railroad. So she was not only volunteering for anti-slavery society activities and meetings and organizations, she was also working to manage the home as an Underground Railroad stop. And so that people, when they came, including Harriet Tubman, who probably met Frederick Douglass for the first time, and Anna Murray, she would have met Anna Murray too, there in his home. And Frederick Douglass writes a very famous letter, and I have it in one of my books, They Can't Pull Us Up, about Harriet Tubman. He writes and says to Harriet Tubman, everything that I've done in our cause to fight against slavery has been in front of the crowd. I've been there and people have given me all this praise, and I've gotten the praise and the applause from all these people. What you've done, Harriet, you did under the stars, under the darkness of night. And you only have the people who people who were scared and maybe running around barefoot and desperate. Those are the thank yous you have. I did mine in the day, you did yours in the night, and you are a remarkable person. You should be respected, and people should know that what you did was real because I saw what you did. But it wasn't only just Harriet. His wife was doing things as well, behind the scenes as well. It wasn't just him. There were many people who were doing it in the same way that Harriet Tubman did, who were doing things and risking their own personal comforts to make sure things happen. And Anna Murray was one of them. And she ends up, as I mentioned, doing things on the Underground Railroad in their home in Rochester. And they eventually moved to Washington, D.C. When they eventually moved to Washington, D.C., they're living in one place in Washington, D.C. for a period of time. And obviously he gets certain jobs in Washington, D.C., including recorder of deeds and things of that nature. And then they end up moving to their major home on Cedar Hill, which is in Washington, D.C. They were married for 44 years, and her children, Rosetta talks about how their mother, even in her last years, even as she started to, develop rheumatoid arthritis and had a stroke and had difficulty getting up and down the stairs, and they had to kind of confine her to the upstairs because she had difficulty getting up and down the stairs, that her mother told her and told them exactly how to run the house. This is what you need to do. And they did it to a T. Apparently the children were not going to disobey mom. She was running the house even when she was sick. She was making sure she was taking care of things even when she was sick. And as I mentioned, she passed away in 1882. So they got married in 1838, and she passed away in 1882. So they were married for 44 years, right? And as we start to think about that and just kind of move with that, we start to see that this is a woman who ends up living a remarkable life. A lot of people know about the things that her husband did and maybe even some of her children, but they don't know that she was the ones who helped them do it. She was the ones that made one of the people who made those things happen, right? For her children as well as for her husband. And as I kind of look at this and I kind of think through it, there would have been no Frederick Douglass without Anna Murray. there would have been no Rosetta Douglas Sprague or Lewis Douglas to be there and to fight during the Civil War, or Charles Douglas or Frederick Douglass Jr. There would have been none of them. Even one of their descendants, as you probably know, one of their great grandchildren ended up marrying a great granddaughter of Booker T. Washington. So one of Frederick Douglass's descendant married one of Booker T. Washington's descendants. All kinds of things happen in their family line moving forward. You never know what your life will bring forth. And if it wasn't for her, if it wasn't for Anna Murray Douglass, there would have been no Frederick Douglass. There would have been none of the things and none of the industriousness and the character that was really built into their children. That was built in by their father and their mother. So I just want to remember Anna Murray Douglass today. I just want to say thank you to her and lift up her name. And I want to thank you guys for all you who put things down in the comments. Let's talk more about her. If you have more questions, more things you want to say, please put it down below. I thank you so much and God bless you. I'll join you back soon. Thank you.